You're listening to the Dibbly-Dobbly podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram.
Hi, I'm Peter Della Penna, and you're joining the Dibbly-Dobbly podcast.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Dibbly-Dobbly podcast. And on the podcast, we have started a new series on the podcast looking at associate nations within cricket and how they are developing the game in their country. Many of us cricket fans know so much about the established cricketing countries and not enough on the associate nations who play cricket. So it would be nice to learn more about those associate countries, and via the podcast, people can learn more as well. For today's Associate Cricket Series episode, we are discussing all things associate and USA cricket. Joining me to discuss and talk all things associate and USA cricket is Peter Della Penna. Peter, welcome.
Thank you, Jack, for having me. Pleasure.
It's a pleasure to have you on, Peter, and it's great to have you here, the expert on associate and US cricket. And you've been covering the game for many years, and it's good to have you on to chat about associate cricket and US cricket, given that it's been heavily talked about of late in the cricketing world. But before we do that, Peter, as I do with all my guests that I've interviewed on the podcast, I'd like to take them back to when they first got into cricket. And it's been very fascinating listening to people's memories on how they got started into cricket. And it's just fascinating listening to how people got into the game. And everyone finds a different path into the game. So, Peter, let's go back to the very beginning, the beginning of your cricket journey, I should say. What were your earliest memories of watching, playing, and even going to the cricket?
Well, I describe it almost in a sense of Back to the Future style terms of there was a split in the space-time continuum in July 22nd, 2005. And basically, I grew up in New Jersey, born and raised in New Jersey. Well, technically born in New York, but raised in New Jersey. And was a big sports fan my whole life. I was a family of five, two older brothers, and sports was a big thing growing up, and especially all the typical American sports. We were New York Giants season ticket holders for 48 years. My dad had them going back to when the Giants were in Yankee Stadium, and then when they went into the Yellow Bowl before Giant Stadium was built. And so growing up, we were in section 123, row 30, in the corner of the home team end zone on the east side of the stadium. And that was a great kind of part of growing up, and tailgating and all the stuff that I associate with going to NFL games anyway. And but it wasn't just NFL. We were huge ice hockey fans growing up. Ice hockey was probably my favorite sport growing up, definitely to play. I don't really follow it much anymore, almost out of a sense of withdrawal. Once I stopped playing, it was hard to watch. But growing up in New Jersey, I was a huge New Jersey Devils fan, and right at the time when they won 3 Stanley Cups in 1995, 2000, 2003, that was kind of their heyday. Yeah. And, so a lot of New Jersey Devils players were my heroes growing up. One of my favorite memories as a kid was when the Stanley Cup was brought to the Meadowlands in New Jersey, and we waited for a couple hours just so we could take a picture with the Stanley Cup and touch the Stanley Cup. That was a huge deal. And baseball, New York Mets. So my dad was a Yankees fan, but me and my brothers grew up Mets fans for some inexplicable reason, because the Yankees were in the middle of their late 90s dynasty when I was growing up in New Jersey, and the Mets still haven't won a World Series since 1986. So I don't know how that happened, but we would go to Mets games regularly, taking the subway in, we would take a New Jersey Transit bus in, and then take the subway from Times Square out to the 7 train out to Shea Stadium and now Citi Fields. All these things were part of growing up, and we played whatever sport there was in the season. So in the winter we would play football outside, American football, and in the spring we would play baseball. Little League baseball was a big part of growing up, and we would play pond hockey in the winter. We had a pond near us that froze over. We would play pond hockey, and then we would play hockey in the rinks. We would get up at 4 a.m. to go for a 5:15 practice time in Morristown at Menon Arena, which was the big ice rink kind of in the community, and tennis in the summer. We would play tennis, anything, what the kids in the neighborhood were doing and what other kids in our peer group were doing, whatever that season was. That's what we did. That was part of growing up. And I had no concept of cricket in New Jersey. And it wasn't until going to college. I worked in the athletic department at Creighton University. I went to Creighton, which is in Omaha, Nebraska, and they're most well known for their soccer team and for their men's basketball team. The men's basketball team was consistently ranked in the top 25, and they've had quite a few players go on to the NBA. Most recently, in the last 20 years or so, the two players in particular, Kyle Korver, who had a very lengthy NBA career, and Doug McDermott, who was National Player of the Year at Creighton, who was drafted by the Bulls, and he's bounced around the league since then. But Anthony Tolliver was in my class. Anthony Tolliver was in my freshman seminar class. And he almost, we didn't think he would last at Creighton. And then his junior year, he went to see his sports psychologist. I remember in the athletic department, that was a big thing because he was almost on the verge of losing his scholarship. And the coach at the time, Dana Altman, who's now with Oregon, but who was a longtime Creighton head coach, kind of the inside word was he didn't want him around anymore. He was trying to find an excuse to get Anthony to transfer. And then Anthony all of a sudden went from being one of the worst players on the team to his junior year. He was incredible. And the last 2 years did well enough to get a free agent contract, I believe. I don't think he was drafted, but he's been in the NBA for about a decade, and he actually met his wife in our freshman seminar class. His wife Jessica. I remember when they met, and it's kind of interesting that's where he met his future wife. But anyway, yeah, so I worked in the athletic department. I worked men's basketball games. I worked men's soccer games, baseball, softball, volleyball. I did everything. And I always thought I was going to be going into a career in sports broadcasting, doing football or baseball or basketball or something along those lines. And I on campus, I worked in the athletic department, like I said, in various capacities. But after a few years of doing various things in sports marketing and sports information, I got opportunities to do broadcasting on the campus radio and campus streaming service. So I did over 200 games in terms of Creighton baseball and softball primarily, but I also did a lot of Creighton soccer, men's, women's soccer games, and did a few basketball games and a few volleyball games as well. But so I always thought it would be doing one of those things. And my junior year, I decided to spend a semester abroad in Australia. Now this is where the cricket part comes in, Jack. So finally, I decided to do a semester abroad, and I wanted to go someplace where I could experience another sports culture, just to see how sports were done in a different part of the world, but also do it in an English-speaking country because I didn't want to have that hurdle. And Australia fascinated me for a couple reasons. One, when I remember the New Year's Eve celebrations at the Millennium, the one in Sydney Harbor blew my mind. Seeing all these fireworks go off in Sydney Harbor when the Millennium countdown came around, and then later that year, the Sydney Olympics in 2000. I always watched the Olympics and seeing how that was covered. I just thought, wow, this is a place I really want to go to one day because this looks awesome, and all these people look like they're just having a great time, and just looks like an incredible community in Sydney. And so I picked Sydney, really thinking that I would get sucked into Aussie rules and rugby, and I had no concept really of cricket. I thought I knew cricket existed, and I thought maybe I'll get to see a cricket match while I'm there, but it wasn't at the top of my list of priorities of things to do. The one thing that I had locked in was going to the Melbourne Cup. I want to go to the Melbourne Cup. That was I was always a big horse racing fan growing up. One of my favorite experiences in life was going to the Belmont Stakes in 2004 with my brother when Smarty Jones was trying to go win the Triple Crown, and Smarty Jones lost to Birdstone. that day, but 100,000 people at Belmont Park was incredible. And just the atmosphere that I love horse racing, and I've been to a lot of racetracks around the U.S., and I thought going to the Melbourne Cup would be pretty cool. And so definitely wanted to do that. And that wound up being the year for the Aussie fans on your podcast. That was the year that Maccabi Diva won for the third time. So I got to witness history at that race. And I just went there for the whole week for the Melbourne Cup racing carnival. But cricket was really an afterthought. And it wasn't until I got off the plane. I went for the July to November semester on the Australian academic calendar. And I got off the plane July 22nd, 2005, the day that changed my life forever. Get off the plane, and we were on our way to Cairns for our student orientation before we went to Macquarie. I was supposed to study Macquarie, but our program took us to Cairns. They wanted to take us to the Great Barrier Reef to get us into our Aussie immersion. And we were there for a week. And I get off the plane in Brisbane on the way to Cairns, and the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald of the newsstand says, "Bloody hell, these palms mean business." And there's a picture of Ricky Ponting cut from the Steve Harmison bouncer on the opening day of play at Lord's in the first Ashes test in 2005. And I read the summary. It was written by Chloe Saltow, who at the time was just a reporter. And now I believe she's the chief sports editor at the Age and the Herald. I read Chloe Saltow's report, and it might as well have been written in Chinese. Didn't understand a single thing that she wrote. But we got to our accommodation that night in Cairns, and all over the televisions in the accommodation, it was SBS showing the Ashes. And I thought, all right, if I'm going to be here for the next 6 months and I want to try and fit in and not make a fool out of myself, I should probably try and get to learn what it is that they're showing on TV right now. And there were certain things that you could pick up without needing help or assistance. You know, if Shane Warne took a wicket and he went out of his mind celebrating, and you saw on the scoreboard, 3 changed to 4, 4 changed to 5. Obviously, somebody just got out. Okay, if the ball hits the stumps, and you see the scoreboard add 1, all right, obviously somebody just got out. If somebody hits the ball in the air and they catch it, that's out. I could figure that out. If the ball doesn't hit the ground before it's caught, that's out. Okay. If somebody hits the ball and it goes to the rope, you see 4 runs added to the scoreboard. Okay, that doesn't take a genius. But some of the more nuanced things were a bit complicated. So something that if you don't grow up with cricket, you as somebody growing up with cricket, you take for granted a lot of things. If you don't grow up with it, watching on TV is a very jarring experience in terms of simple things. So, and I think about this in reverse, where I grew up with American football. You grow up seeing things on the playground and seeing games in person. If you're watching American football on TV, there is so much action that happens off camera. And if you don't grow up with it, it can be very hard to conceptualize if you're not used to it. And there's many elements of that with cricket. So, for example, I say, when they hit 4 and it goes to the boundary, that's obvious. Well, if they take a single or a 2 and the ball comes off the bat and the camera tracks the ball and they don't show the runners running between the wickets, 2 runs get added to the scoreboard. Well, wait a second. How the hell did they score 2 runs? Where did they run? The concept of bowlers bowling from different ends, alternating overs. Okay, so on screen, the graphic might say bowling from the pavilion end and bowling from the media box end or whatever. That doesn't mean anything to me, because in modern cricket, it didn't used to be this way, but in modern televised cricket, the camera is always behind the bowler's arm. 50, 60 years ago, you only had one camera where the bowler would be the camera would be behind the bowler at one end, and then the opposite end, the camera would be behind the wicket keeper. So you always knew, it was obvious when they changed ends. Since the 70s and 80s, since World Series cricket, essentially, with Kerry Packer and all the innovations he had, one of them was putting a camera at both ends. So you see, all right, now bowling from this end to that end, that doesn't mean anything to me, because the camera is always behind the the bowler. What do you mean they're switching ends? And so it wasn't until I actually went to my first match in person, which would have been the Super Test in Sydney when Australia took on the world just after the Ashes. I had this epiphany at the start of the second over of play. All of a sudden, at the second over, the first over ends, the second over is about to begin. I see everybody switch ends, and I thought, oh my God, now it makes sense. All this stuff about bowling from one end or bowling from the other end. And now I get why they're talking about, why a left-hander on the short boundary or a right-hander on the short boundary, depending on the end they're hitting from. And, oh, Jesus, like, why didn't they ever show this stuff before? And seeing how close or how far the wicketkeeper and the slips are. Because, again, on TV, the barrel of the lens makes it look like they're very close to the stumps, especially for a pace bowler. When you're there in person, you see Adam Gilchrist and Ricky Ponting and Matthew Hayden and Shane Warne in the slips. They're basically on the 30-yard circle. They're 30 yards back from the stumps. It's like, that's quite deep. I didn't realize that. And then even for when Shane Warne was bowling and he had Matthew Hayden at slip, again, on TV, it looks like Matthew Hayden is like maybe 5 feet away from the stumps and adjacent to Adam Gilchrist. No, Matthew Hayden is like 8-10 yards deep behind the stumps. So all those subtle little things were incredibly fascinating to me going to watch a match in person. But anyway, get back and wrap up this story about how I got into it. So I was watching the first test in Cairns, and all these things were happening. It kind of pieced together a little bit, but the broader concepts that I'm talking about now, it didn't click until we get back to Sydney, and the night before the second test begins, there was like a party in our village, Macquarie University Village, and this kid, Daniel, it was the only time I ever met him in my life. It was a local Aussie kid, and he just kind of stumbled into our house looking for beer. And again, for context, in our house, it was all Americans. So I went to Australia looking to like meet Australians, hang out with Australian people, immerse in Australian culture. And on my housing form, it asked, do you want to live with international students or local students? And in my head, I didn't think about this before I checked it off. I'm coming from America, you think international students, that means everybody but Americans. Well, when you're in Australia, you're an international student. And I wish I'd thought about that more clearly, because I checked off international students, and then I got to Sydney and I realized I'm living with all Americans. I'm like, Jesus Christ, I've been with Americans all my life. The whole point of coming here was to meet other people, not people I've been around forever. So I was really frustrated about that. And finally, Daniel walks in. I'm like, oh, thank God, it's an Aussie, somebody I can ask about cricket, all this stuff I've been trying to read in the articles and since the end of the first test and everything I don't understand. And poor Daniel Hogue, he was probably just looking for some beer, and then all of a sudden this American is asking him all these ridiculous questions about cricket, chewing his ear off for an hour and a half. But he was very patient with me. I asked him, what's the difference between a wicket, and a wicket? You've got the same word that means several different things. What's the difference between seam and swing and spin bowling and leg spin and off spin? And, why would you arrange a batting order a certain way? I didn't understand why everybody was talking about Adam Gilchrist so much as somebody who's this devastating player, one of the top batsmen in the world at the time, averaging over 50. He opens in one-day cricket. So if he opens in one-day cricket, why the hell is he batting at number 7 in Test cricket? I didn't understand that. Things that would unfold later in the series. So like Shane Warne at Old Trafford in the third test, he scored 90 in his first innings. And, a lot of the Aussie batters were struggling. And I'm thinking to myself, well, Shane Warne, he's scoring some runs this series. Why the hell is he batting at number 8? Why don't they promote him up to number 4? Because, Simon Kaddish and Damian Martin, they're really struggling. Why isn't Warne bat higher? This doesn't make any sense to me. If Shane Warne is so awesome, why are they waiting until the 25th or the 30th over to bowl him for the first time? This doesn't make any sense. If he's your best bowler, why isn't he opening with the new ball? When Glenn McGraw went down in the opening morning at Edgbaston, why didn't they just allow Warney to open the bowling? You can deal without Glenn McGraw. Well, why did they wait until England were 90 for none or whatever it was, and just Gothic and Strauss had gotten off to this incredible start? Why did they wait that long until they decided to bring on Shane Warne? It didn't make any sense to me. So, all these things happen, and he was very patient with me. And yeah, so I watched the first night of play in Australia anyway, of the opening morning of the second test at Edgbaston, and everything just starts clicking for me. It makes so much more sense now that Daniel's explained all the terminology and a lot of the strategic points to me. And that just happens to be one of the greatest tests of all time. England wins by 2 runs, and I was hooked, and I just never looked back. And the rest of the series was incredible. Obviously, my favorite test was that third test at Old Trafford. I just I remember staying up till 3 a.m. in Sydney. More, it might have been 3:30, 4 a.m. Seeing Brett Lee and Glenn McGraw and Michael Kasparich. Was it Michael Kasparich? I can't remember. No, it was McGraw and Lee holding on for the draw the last 24 balls after Ricky Ponting got out. So and I remember being like so pumped, and I knew kind of I was mentally disturbed by the fact that I was actively cheering for a draw. This was so completely un-American that I was like so pumped and so stoked for a draw. Like, what the hell is wrong with me? This is not something Americans are supposed to do. But that just showed how much cricket had warped my mind, never to be undone.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Peter. It's a wonderful story that you told there about how you got into this game. And funny enough, it was in Australia, which is, cricket's the national sport.
Yeah, no, and after once the Ashes ended, I went straight online after the conclusion of the 5th test and bought tickets to every day of the Super Test that was going to be in October. And then I went online, and I was not supposed to go home. I was until January 10th. So most of the kids, once the semester ended in November, they all wanted to go home and spend Christmas with their families. I thought I may never get to come to Australia again. I wanted to spend New Year's Eve in Sydney Harbour. So again, the 2 things I wanted to do, I wanted to go to the Melbourne Cup and spend New Year's Eve in Sydney Harbour. Those were the only 2 things I had pre-planned. And when I had asked for my plane tickets to be booked by the study abroad coordinator, I asked him, can I come back January 2nd or 3rd? And they said the earliest ticket they could buy that was cost effective was January 10th if I wanted to stay for New Year's Eve. So that wound up working out for me because, I bought tickets to every day of the Super Test, and then I bought tickets to all 5 days of the New Year's Test, which is against South Africa that year. And it was Ricky Ponting's 100th test. He scored a century in 8 innings, and they chased, I think it was 281 or 278, whatever it was. On the last day, Graham Smith ran a generous early declaration, and then it was just a road chasing that. But I went to all 5 days of that, and the thing I remember most about going to that, I bought tickets as soon as the Ashes test ended because I wanted to go, and it was an incredible experience. The thing I remember most about watching all 5 days of that test in person is that my ass was completely sore by day 4. And I thought, Jesus God, like, I don't know how people have been doing this their entire lives, sitting still and sitting in a hard chair back seat for 5 days. It's killing my body, and I don't know how much longer I can do this. But so it was a test of endurance, not just for the players out in the field. It's a test for the fans having to sit in those seats for 5 days. But it was incredible, and I just couldn't get enough of it, and just kind of to wrap up that immersion experience on the plane home, I had a Qantas flight going back from Sydney to Los Angeles, and then Los Angeles to Newark, New Jersey. Again, I had never seen cricket in America up to this point in my life. I didn't know if it existed. I towards the end, I was doing some Google searches. I thought there may be some cricket clubs in Nebraska and Omaha where Creighton is, but it wasn't a guarantee. And more than that, I had no idea if I was going to be able to have access to watch cricket. So I thought, I really need to burn this in my memory so that I never forget this experience. So on the flight back, the Qantas flight back, they had this SBS Ashes kind of documentary retrospective, whatever, where they kind of recapped all 5 tests and had some commentary. So it was Simon Hill was the host, Dean Jones and Greg Matthews were the 2 studio analysts. And it was like an hour and 40 minutes. So they spent 20 minutes on each test. And so I watched that SBS Ash's summary 2-hour thing, hour and 40-minute thing. I watched it 7 times straight on the flight. Once it ended, I would just loop it back again on the 14-hour flight because I thought I have to just remember this stuff. I have to burn it in, or
Yeah.
else I might never be able to see it again.
Yeah.
And so the person who was sitting next to me on the flight probably thought I was again a psychopath. Something mentally wrong with this person. That why are they watching the same thing 7 times in a row? And fortunately, once I got back to the US, I discovered there is access, pretty incredible access to cricket, arguably better than there is in Australia, and England and a lot of other places, and access to plenty of other things to do with cricket too. So, but yeah, I remember in the early days when I came back, the one day series, the Tri series, whatever was the VB series, it was Sri Lankan, I think. Sri Lankan, South Africa, or Sri Lankan, the West Indies. West Indies and South Africa were the 2 testings that toured. But the VB series that year, yeah, it was Sri Lankan and one of the 2. And I remember coming back to my house that I was living with 3 other guys just off campus at Creighton, and I would have the ABC Australia commentary on the radio coming through my laptop with Jim Maxwell and the rest of the crew. And it's like the matches would start at 9 p.m. in Omaha and go until 3-4 a.m. And what the hell is this guy listening to? 3 a.m. in Nebraska. Why the hell does he have this ridiculous cricket broadcast on?
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic, Peter. I think everyone can relate to that. Watching games over and over again. I do that. That nostalgia sort of thing. But for you, it was more of a learning sort of tool. Otherwise it would escape your mind, and then quickly you would forget again.
Yeah, to me, I felt like I had missed out on 20 years of experiences that I needed to catch up on. To me, it was just a massive game of catch up. All these other people had been watching cricket, following cricket their entire lives, and I had missed out on this wonderful sport. And I just felt like, geez, I've got to really speed up my education here to just catch up to all the things I've missed and other people take for granted that they can just recall. So, again, one of my more sadder, pathetic experiences or awesome experiences, depending on what side of the fence you're on. My spring break, I went to New Zealand. So it was mid-October, late September, early mid-October. And I went to New Zealand. And I was in Auckland for a week, and then I went around the South Island for a week, Queenstown, and worked my way back up all the way up to Christchurch, and took a ferry over to Wellington. But that first week in Auckland, it rained basically every day. And so I think the first or second day, when it was like the only time it was clear, I went to go to Mount Rangitoto, the volcano that's kind of there in Auckland. And then I came back, and basically the rest of the week, I went into, I can't remember what bookstore it was, if it was a Borders or if it was something else, a Dymocks. I don't know if they have those in New Zealand. But I just went into every bookstore that was open, and I'd spend like majority of my spring break when it was raining outside. I just went into these bookstores and picked off any cricket book off the shelf. And as a cheapskate student, I just tried to sit there for 6 or 7 hours and read the books without having to pay for them. And so, like Steve Waugh's autobiography was just released at that point in time, which was like 900 pages or something ridiculous like that. And, trying to read through that without having to pay for it. And I went into all these used bookstores. There's some amazing used bookstores in and around Sydney and in Auckland and definitely in Christchurch too, where you could get used cricket books. And you can't go into a used bookstore in the US, Jack, and buy used cricket books, unfortunately. It's something you can only do there. So I just wanted to stockpile books, speed up my education. So I bought Imran Khan's autobiography and Viv Richards' autobiography and Richard Hadley's autobiography and Shane Warren's autobiography, one of several he wound up writing, but the one that was very cleverly titled "My Autobiography" by Shane Warren. I read that one, and you know, uh, what I'm trying to think, there were a lot of books that, whatever Ian Botham, I think his autobiography, can't remember. Andrew Flintoff had a new book out after he was a hero during the Ashes that year in
Yeah.
2005, and so he was capitalizing that fame, and he wrote a book. I bought that and read that. Um, there were just any cricket book that I could access and find that would help educate me in any way, no matter how cleverly or how poorly these books were written. Just the fact that they were cricket books was like, ooh, I have to have this and I have to read this to find out what happened in this guy's career because he was a big deal.
Yeah.
And again, it was just kind of trying to access these elements of history that you grow up in the 80s, 90s, 2000s. Oh, you take for granted. Oh, of course I know who Imran Khan is. Of course, he won the 92 World Cup. Of course, who Richard Hadley is and Viv Richards and this and that. Well, I didn't know who any of these people were, and I wanted to find out. So I was just desperate to get my hands on anything that could help educate me.
Yeah, that's fantastic. You wanted to learn more and embrace yourself with the history, which I'm passionate about as well, the history of the game, which is a long, rich history. And you wanted to learn more about that. Has that made you appreciate the game even more in your line of work, being a cricket journalist covering cricket? Has that made you appreciate the game more?
Well, especially from the American standpoint, 100%, because there's the point of pride that American and Canada had the first ever match in 1844. And you grow up in America reading all about the history of the American sports and where those sports came to be and began, the first football game, American football, Princeton Rutgers in New Jersey. And, the first, the origins of baseball and Major League Baseball and, the early, World Series. And, one of the things that, at least when I was growing up, I don't know if it's still like this to this day, but one of the most fascinating things growing up for me was reading about the 1919 World Series with the Black Sox and 8 men out, and which is especially educational when you kind of put it into the context of the match fixing sagas that have developed over the years in cricket, and how it compares to what happened with the Black Sox and Shoeless Joe Jackson. And you look at ice hockey again. Growing up as a huge ice hockey fan, reading about and studying ice hockey and the origins of ice hockey, and the original six is something that ice hockey fans, or at least NHL fans, grow up with and take for granted. Referencing the original six and just pictures and images of in particular, the goaltenders and how the equipment has evolved over the years and the history around that, where, goalies didn't used to wear helmets. And the technique of, being a goaltender in ice hockey, how that's changed with the evolution of technology, and how, somebody like Ken Dryden was really one of the first goalies to consistently wear a helmet. And he had a legendary career with the Montreal Canadiens as a goalie. And, you think of then everybody else, wearing helmets or not wearing helmets, and, the Gordie Howes of the world, and how long they played, and, learning what a Gordie Howe hat trick was, a goal assist in a fight in hockey, and all that stuff. And, thinking about, when I was growing up, it was kind of a noteworthy thing that Craig McTavish was the last player who didn't wear a helmet. It was a rule that was grandfathered in when they put the helmet rule in place. It was guys who had started their careers were not obligated to wear a helmet. Everybody whose career began after the rule was in place had to wear a helmet. But so you'd see this oddity, Craig McTavish skating around the ice without a helmet on. He's the only guy on the ice without a helmet on, is because his career started before it was made mandatory. So he just, instead of saying for safety reasons, oh well, I'm going to wear a helmet now because I don't want to have a head injury. He's like, no, I've played my whole career without a helmet. I'm just going to keep playing without a helmet. So all those little things about sports and history, I've always grown up with and appreciated, and the fact that in particular, USA doesn't really have a lot of matches to access in terms of video footage or television footage. They just never been broadcast because they haven't been at that standard that would demand it. What becomes more fascinating and for me inquisitive about U.S. cricket history in particular is its place in history, and the fact that they did have the first international match 33 years before the Ashes, and then that makes you wonder, well, if they were playing international cricket before Australia and England, where did it go wrong? Why are they not a test country? They had some pretty amazing players at that point in time. There was a strong cricket culture in America. Why isn't there a strong cricket culture in America 160 years later, like there is in Australia and England or South Africa or the West Indies? And that for me has been very fascinating to access and observe. And there's some incredible pieces of history that can be accessed in Philadelphia, whether it's the facilities, Marion Cricket Club, Philadelphia Cricket Club, or the C.C. Morris Library on the campus of Haverford College, where they've got so many cricket artifacts. And people from around the world come to visit the C.C. Morris Library because it's quite an incredible source of history. But even, you go to other places. On my time since 2005, coming back to Australia and going around England and other places, you can find places where they've got stuff to do with American cricket history and visits. And this past summer, I spent some time in Old Trafford and in the library that's Lancashire Cricket, their property, and they've got all sorts of stuff about American cricket tours to England and specifically to Lancashire, and it's quite fascinating reading stuff that was written in the 1900s about the American touring sides, and I love all that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Same here, Peter. I couldn't agree more. The history of the game is a wonderful subject, and we've done a few episodes on the history of the game on the podcast, because you can learn so much from the history of the game. What's your cricket experience like in terms of, in terms of playing cricket yourself? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, and now this is probably the part that is the greatest source of frustration for me, in that cricket culture is very peculiar in a lot of ways, but this is one of them. And when people are introduced to other sports, there's always great source of encouragement and encouragement to fail so that you can learn from your mistakes, see what you've done wrong, and improve and continue to grow your love of the sport. So if somebody's playing soccer or American football for the first time, or ice hockey, one of the most basic things about ice hockey, learning to skate, it's an incredibly difficult thing. But you fall on your ass, you get up, you get going again, you fall down again, you get up, you keep going. People, hey, come on, fall down. That's part of learning to play ice. Learning to fall properly, learning to fall in a way that you're not going to injure yourself, getting your body in position that you're going to fall, you're going to get knocked down, but learning to coordinate your body so that you land on a fleshy part. You're not going to get a broken wrist, or you're not going to crack your skull or whatever. But they encourage it. Hey, come on. These are things that everybody goes through. If you're learning to throw a baseball or learning to catch a baseball for the first time, you might get hit in the face. you might get hit in the balls. You might get hit in plenty of other places that are not comfortable or might produce an injury. But hey, It's the only way you're going to learn. This is how you
Yeah.
catch. This is how you throw. This is how you hold the glove, whatever. This is how you swing a bat. Try, fail. That's okay. As long as you're having fun, keep going. Cricket is perhaps one of the few, if only, sports where there's this obsession by the people who play it that you will not be offered an opportunity to play unless they think you are a master and you've learned all the ins and outs before joining a club match. And this is not an international match. We're not talking about playing for Australia, or playing for USA, or playing an international match. Playing in a club match for the first time. We will not let you take the field in a club match unless you have a textbook technique with a high elbow and straight bat, and unless you know the LBW law, and unless you know how to count to 6, very important life skill, counting to 6.
Yeah.
Unless you know how to count to 6, we can't let you play. We're not going to let you play because cricket is a very serious game, and only very serious people can play cricket. And so that has been my initiation into playing cricket. Is that when I came back from Australia, the very, very first experience I had playing cricket was me and 3 of my American friends at Macquarie University Village. After the Ashes ended in 2005, we went to a Rebel Sports shop in Sydney, and we bought like a starter set of a bat and the stumps and whatever. And we just went into the local park that was adjacent to Macquarie, and we didn't know what the hell we were doing, but we just set up the stumps and we pretended, it was, like you grow up in America and you're in the backyard and, hey, I'm Phil Simms, or I'm Peyton Manning, or I'm Eli Manning, or I'm going to throw the winning touchdown, or I'm Michael Jordan, and there's 5 seconds left. I'm in my driveway on the backboard, and Michael Jordan, 3, 2, 1, and I'm hitting the winning shot, and the crowd goes up. What were we doing? We're in the park, and I'm Warney, and the guy batting, I'm Ricky Ponting, and we're all pretending to be the Australians, and we were having fun. We were all throwing, chucking whatever. We couldn't bowl with a straight arm, but the point is we were having fun. And we thought we knew what we were doing. And then this 10-year-old kid came by and he's like, hey, can I play with you guys? And then he humiliated all of us by showing us how to actually play cricket. But we were having fun. And then I get back to the US and I'm trying to, like I said, I'm Googling all these places, trying to join a club, whatever. And I find out there's an Omaha Cricket Club. And I reach out to try and join. And the first conversation I had was with this guy named Bhaskar Krishna, who went on to, he's become one of my best friends in life. But at the time, this is my first conversation with him. And I call him up and I say, I got your number. I'm interested in joining Omaha Cricket. And he goes, well, have you ever played cricket before? And I said, I was messing around in Australia in the parks, whatever, during my semester abroad. But other than that, no, I've not played a formal organized game. And he goes, but I tell him, I say, I've played sports my entire life. I'm a decent athlete. I grew up playing baseball and ice hockey and whatever the hell else. And, but you not played cricket. He says, oh, yeah. Well, he says, we got a match on Saturday. This is on Wednesday or Thursday. We got a match on Saturday. You can come and watch and see what it's like to play cricket. And then after watching us, maybe you can come to a practice session and, and we'll have a look at you and we'll think about whether it's right for you to join the club or not. And he made it out to be very serious stuff. This is not, we don't let people who have never played before come join the club. And then, sure enough, as happens in cricket, I'm sure, Jack, that you've experienced this at some point in time. Friday night phone call at 10 p.m. Peter, we've had a couple of people drop out. Yeah, do you still want to play? then all of a sudden it's cricket isn't that serious after all. Oh, Jesus.
Yeah.
You know, we've had a couple guys, the usual dropouts. Oh, geez, we're struggling for a warm body. Hey, come on, please. So I'm like jumping out of my skin. Oh, my God, I'm going to get a chance to play. I said, when's the match start? He goes, be there for 8 a.m. We're going to start at 9. Yeah. Okay. I couldn't sleep all night. I was so excited. I'm shadow batting in the mirror and doing, all this stuff. I've got my whites. I bought whites in Australia. So, because again, I knew I probably wouldn't be able to find cricket equipment in America. So I made sure to buy things before I left Australia. Yep. Okay. So I had whites. I had a set of Gray Nichols whites, and I had a floppy hat, Gray Nichols floppy hat. And, I made sure I went to Greg Chappell Cricket Center. That's where I got my equipment before I left Australia. Okay. I don't know if they still exist. I hope they do. I'm assuming they do.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. Still going strong.
So I went to Greg Chappell Cricket Center, got my stuff. And I drove to the cricket ground. I went on Google Maps, made sure to drive to the cricket ground the night before so I didn't get lost. I knew where this, and made sure it actually existed.
Yep.
And NP Dodge Park was the place in North Omaha. And I guess you could call it a cricket ground. It was a place where they played cricket, let's just say that. And so I'm jumping at my I can't sleep. I think I stayed up until like 5 or 6 a.m. just thinking, I can't wait to play cricket. Finally fell asleep for a few hours, set my alarm, woke up for 7:30. Get to the ground for 8 a.m. As I said, match is going to start at 9. Get to the ground for 8 a.m. And I'm the first person there. And I'm thinking, has the match been canceled? Did I come to the right place? Do I have the right? I wait there for 15 minutes. Still nobody. I get in my car and I'm about to leave, and Bosker finally rolls in. And I introduce myself and I say, hey, is the match still on? He says, oh, yeah, the match is still on. I said, well, where is everybody? He's like, oh, I'll get here. We didn't wind up starting until 11 a.m. That's how ultra serious this very important club cricket match was, that they weren't sure I would be allowed to play in, because cricket is an ultra serious sport, especially club cricket. And my reward for being the first person there and being extremely eager to play was, my reward was coming in at number 10, I think it was. They didn't want me to come in at number 11 because it was an insurance policy just in case, I got out quickly, whatever. But like I think I scored 2. I had one scoring shot, I remember. I was a straight drive back down the ground. And then I got out. I was bowled by a Yorker a couple balls later. And but I think they were shocked that I could lay bat on ball. And they were, and especially there was a straight drive. I wasn't trying to hit it like a baseball or whatever nonsense people say. And then I told them, hey, I can field. Like, put me anywhere, I'll field. And they're like, we'll see what he does. So they put me at square leg. And I think it was like the 7th or 8th over the chase. It's this guy flicks like a full delivery off his legs, low to me, carries about like shin height. I take it, I catch it, I fling it up in the air, I go nuts, thinking like, oh, this is what you're supposed to do when you celebrate a catch. And everybody just stood and stared at me for a good 3-4 seconds. Didn't say anything. And then finally they're like, oh yeah. I was like, holy shit, this guy actually caught the ball. Hey, maybe we can let him play after all. And that was my first match. But over the course of the summer, it was a struggle to get opportunities, because there was an internal battle at the club, and this is not the first place I've experienced this, where there were forward-thinking people like Bosker and a couple others at the club who were like, hey, we keep talking nonstop about, hey, we want to grow the game to mainstream Americans, and we want these people to get opportunities and encourage them to play. Well, here's one in the flesh. He's shown up. He's eager. He knows all the laws. He knows that they are laws and not rules. And he comes and shows up first every training session and does everything else we ask him, whereas half the other guys at the club are complete bums and are, aren't interested in doing anything in the voluntary aspects of the club and whatnot. How are we encouraging this guy? By sending him to bat at 10 and 11 every match? Is that really the way to encourage him to want to keep playing and be a part of our club? Like this is not the right way, or is it the right way to go about things? And there was this huge internal battle with the club philosophically, where I became kind of a lightning rod in terms of like, should I earn my way through improving myself as somebody who's just playing a season of club cricket for the very first time? And should all these guys who've been playing cricket all their lives continue to play ahead of me? Or, am I ever actually going to learn properly if I don't get a chance to be exposed in a proper way? And meaning bat higher up the order, knowing full well that I probably will fail, but at least I'll learn, improve, progress, adapt. And so over the course of the season, I started to progressively get a few more opportunities. And then in the final match of the season, I was able to bowl for the first time. It took me a good 4 or 5 months to learn how to bowl properly without bending my elbow. And so that was completely understandable. I had no issues with them not having me bowl at all. But after a certain point in time, I would probably say in like June, July, I could bowl properly, and I was getting people out in the nets. And I'm thinking, I'm getting a lot of people out in the nets with my off spin. Why am I not getting opportunities to bowl in a match? And it was all, these people are just attacking because he sucks, and he's just getting lucky, and he's getting people out of the nets because they're just being aggressive because they want to smash him, and then they're just goofing up at times. Yeah. But I kept on taking wickets in the nets, and Bhaskar and some of the other guys were like, got to give him a shot at some point. This is what's there to lose? Every other guy bowls junk and filth. Like, come on. And we don't make any complaints about them saying they shouldn't be allowed to bowl. So final match of the season, they give me the ball, and I bowl. I come in, and I almost was called for no ball on my first delivery because I didn't declare my action. I didn't know that you had to do this because, again, you watch on TV, and you don't hear them say, tell the umpire, right arm around the wicket, whatever. All right. And so I'm about to bowl, and I'd never done this in a match, and I'd obviously never paid attention to like when my teammates had done this every time they come on to bowl. And so I'm about to bowl, and like this guy Srini stops me and says, "Peter, did you tell the umpire what you're about to do?" And I'm like, "Why would I tell the umpire what I'm about to do? Like, that's stupid. Like, it's supposed to be a surprise what I'm about to do." They're like, No, you need to tell them, like, you're coming over the wicket, around the wicket, like, it's part of the rules. It's like, oh, okay. Right arm over the wicket. And he says, all right, right arm over the wicket, bowler coming around. So I let my first delivery go. It's this like grenade. I toss up this lollipop off spinner, and it's just floating. And this guy, his eyes light up. He wants to smash me out of NP Dodge Park, and he comes running down the wicket and misses. And the ball just went over off stump. It bounced. It was a nice flighted delivery. Just went over off stump. And I turned my back, because I thought, oh my God, I almost just nearly bowled on my first delivery. Turn my back, and then I hear the stumps and the bails break.
Yeah.
And then I look, and the leg umpire has given the guy out stumped. And I'm thinking, Jesus Christ. I just took a wicket with my first ball in cricket, and I didn't even get to see it happen. I just turned my head in agony that I've just missed bowling this guy, and without realizing, he could also be out stumped. So, and then I took 2 more wickets that day, and that was huge because then over the course of the winter, then the players at the club started to buy in, and then my second season, then I was getting genuine opportunities. I was batting in the middle order a lot of times. I opened the batting a few times. I was bowling a full quota of overs most matches.
Yep.
Taking a lot of wickets, and then doing my fielding wherever I was fielding. But it took people at the club an awful long time to buy in that I should be given any opportunities, and B, that I would be capable with those opportunities. And that has been a struggle everywhere I've gone. So, I was in Nebraska until I graduated. Once I graduated Creighton, I left. And whether it's playing club cricket in New Jersey, playing club cricket in England, playing club cricket elsewhere, at times it's a struggle to get people to buy into the concept that, an American can play cricket and, they're not going to be a spaz, and they actually have a coordinated body and some semblance of athletic skills. And ironically, probably the places where people have been most encouraging is actually in England. When I played club cricket in England, the people there have been very warm and receptive, and they just judge you on your merit. And if you're good enough, they don't give a shit where you're from. You could be from America, you could be from Namibia, Zimbabwe, South Africa, Australia. Hey, if you can play, you can play. If you can't, you can't. We'll pick you. And even if, and I've seen it with other guys, even if you're not that good, hey, if you love cricket, you come play. Come play in the second 11, come play in the third 11. But we'll find a spot for you is the point. Whereas in America, ironically, the place where I'm born and raised, that's where I've found opportunities most difficult to come by. And part of that is as a consequence of the fact that, contrary to England or Australia or some other places, you don't have a genuine club culture. I said, I said, if you're not that good, there's a second 11 or a third 11 or a fourth 11. They'll find a place for you, but they want you to play, and they want you to enjoy the experience and hang around and be part of the whole club atmosphere. America's not like that. You have what are called clubs, but in reality, it's just a team of guys who are organized and show up together on the weekend. And these clubs in America are designed to never grow beyond 14 or 15 members, because the guys who are in the club, they don't want their spot jeopardized. Competition is not to be encouraged for spots. Okay. And they want a guaranteed opportunity on the weekend. So they figure 3 or 4 guys are always going to be unavailable. And as long as the membership is kept around 14 or 15, that means everybody who wants to play on the weekend is going to get to play. And it's all about protecting your spot and looking out for yourself. And God forbid somebody comes along and enhances the quality of the club by generating healthy competition for spots within the club, because, dear Lord, that might mean that your spot's under threat, and we can't let that happen. And, the concept of growing the membership to 25 or 30 so that you can start a second 11 at the club, oh no, that's like way over their heads. We can't do that. And it's quite sad, because it stunts opportunities for genuine development and encouraging people to play and take up the game. And instead it remains I'm looking out for me. It's literally a case of what you hear about. I brought my bat and I brought my ball, so I'm gonna bat and I'm gonna play. I'll open the batting, and when I get out, it's time for me to go home. And you would see that in Omaha, and I've seen it in other places where literally somebody would show up, open the batting, and in the chase, they would prefer to bat second, so that they could open the batting, and as soon as they get out, they could F off home and leave the rest of us. There would be matches where by the time the match ended, there were only 5 or 6 guys left, because the other 5 guys had decided, I don't want to stick around for the end of the game. I got better things to do with my time. I'm going to go home. So they wouldn't even, the simple courtesy and respect of sticking around to shake hands with the other team wouldn't happen. And let alone the respect for your teammates who are batting at 7, 8, 9, 10. I don't have time to watch you guys. And to me, that was probably one of the most infuriating things about my initial experiences, is that just the simple lack of respect for your own teammates, let alone the other side. But guys who their idea of being part of a team wasn't really to be a part of a team. It was look out for yourself, look out for number one. And once you've gotten to do what you want to do, well, then screw everybody else, and they can fend for themselves. And so in that way, cricket culture in the U.S. is very unhealthy. It's not robust. People are not encouraged to participate first and foremost. Again, to this day, there continues to be what I experienced. I've observed it plenty of times where somebody shows up, they want to play, they're new, they're raw, but they're just enthusiastic. They want to contribute to the sport, whether it's playing or scoring or volunteering in some other capacity. And they're really discouraged from coming back because it's a case of, oh no, you're not Bradman, or you're not Sachin, or
no one could be Bradman. No one could be Bradman.
Well, it's a great sin to not even come close, Jack. Apparently in the U.S. And it's how on earth can you grow the sport that way?
Yeah.
If that's the attitude and that's the mentality that it permeates throughout the community, whether at a local level or regional level or national level. And you see that quite often in the U.S. And until that changes, it's always going to be an uphill battle for the sport to grow, because if you look at the playing numbers in the U.S., cricket is unique in the standpoint that the 99% of the playing base are adults. No other sport is like that in the U.S., and I don't think any other sport is like that anywhere else in the world, where the emphasis on grassroots is virtually non-existent, or if it is, it's misguided and misplaced. I mean, literally baseball, you look at baseball, football, basketball, ice hockey, whatever, 99% of the people playing those sports in the U.S. are under the age of 18. And once you get to university, if you're not good enough to get a scholarship and turn professional, like, you move on with your life. You do other things. It's seen as almost sad or pathetic to be trying to be a 30-year-old playing baseball, club baseball, or club American football. Like, nobody does that. It's ridiculous. They might throw the football around like casually in the backyard or something, but they don't play like competitive organized matches. Whereas cricket, instead of having 99% of the playing base in the U.S. be under the age of 18, it's over the age of 18, and that's not healthy. And it highlights the fact that there's not really an emphasis on genuine grassroots development. People talk about grassroots in the U.S. and grassroots in the U.S. essentially is a bunch of 30 and 40 and 50-year-old guys taking up park space, not cricket space. They take up a park space, so they'll take up a baseball field or a soccer, whatever open green space, and they'll try and make it a de facto cricket field. And it's not a very idealistic cricket experience by any stretch of the imagination. And until that changes, where more encouragement is made in investing and prioritizing youth, like you see in other sports, it's going to be difficult for the sport to grow as a whole. And encouraging new people of any kind. One of the other things that cricket struggles with in the U.S., engaging with females. You look at all the other sports, whether it's basketball, soccer, the highest participation sport in America is girls' youth soccer. Okay, and part of that is because girls and females have had very few opportunities to participate in other sports. They've had access limited. So when soccer came around and they were encouraged to play it, they jumped at it. So, girls' youth soccer, girls' basketball are huge in the U.S. You've got more, millions, literally millions of girls playing. 2 million, 3 million girls, I think, is the data that's been captured playing those sports. Cricket in the U.S. is a major problem culturally and socially, where females are not encouraged. At the most recent AGM, I think the numbers were 300 something, 380, 390, maybe it was 420 females of any age nationwide are playing cricket, when you've got 30, 40, 50,000 men or male players playing cricket. That's a huge disparity and imbalance that needs to be addressed. And again, it highlights systemic issues in the U.S. where new players are not encouraged to take up the sport. It's confined mostly to men, adult males. Youth are not encouraged. Women are not encouraged. And until those things change, where it becomes more like other sports approach to development, cricket is going to struggle in the U.S. And that has nothing to do with the laws or the rules of cricket or how complicated or how simple the sport is.
Yeah.
Cricket doesn't struggle for those reasons. Cricket struggles because the administrators in charge in the U.S. don't take a serious approach to prioritizing the things that other sports prioritize that allow them to be successful in growing and sustaining their sport. And instead, it's more often selfish objectives that are targeted, that are just self-serving.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more there, Peter. And it was fascinating listening to your cricketing journey and going through that, and a little bit about US cricket, which we'll talk about a bit later on in this interview. But it has really set the tone for this interview to talk about associate cricket as we progress through this interview. So I thought, Peter, to start this interview on associate cricket, let's talk about the history of associate cricket, because as we discussed before, the history of the game is a great way to learn about the game more and appreciate where the game has come from. And the history of associate cricket, how the whole concept became a thing, is quite interesting. So, Peter, give us a brief overview on the history of associate cricket, if you can, for us, about how the whole thing became what it is today.
Well, I mean, if you look back at the broad history, yeah, USA and Canada go back to 1844. You've got a country like Argentina that goes back to the 1800s as well. You've cricket in Scotland, cricket in Ireland has got 100+ year history. You've got plenty of other places where there's evidence of cricket going back 100+ years. But in the modern era, the associate game essentially began in 1965 when the ICC admitted the first couple associate members, and I believe it was USA, Fiji, and I can't remember if it was Netherlands or somebody else. But then that progressed to the World Cup in 75 and 79, where you had the ICC trophy. And that is now known as the World Cup qualifier. But when it first began, it was the ICC trophy, and it was, the Associate World Cup, colloquially, I guess, is what it was known as. And you would have countries like Sri Lanka. People forget they were an associate country at one point in time. Zimbabwe, an associate country at one point in time, and USA, and other countries like, again, Fiji, Netherlands. You would have, Kenya, Malaysia, Bangladesh, all these countries, and that event would vary at times. It could be a 20-team event. It could be an 18-team event. It currently is a 10-team event, but when it was first happening in the late 70s and throughout the 80s in England, before it started to be rotated around to host countries, you would have around 20 teams there. And that's kind of how modern associate cricket has unfolded. It's sprouted out from there. And what's fascinating for me from an American perspective is seeing all these countries that were kind of on a level footing with USA, who have left USA in the dust. And again, it further highlights the structural issues, the administrative issues that have been really poor for USA, and how misguided they've been. You take a look at, whether it's Papua New Guinea, who were on level footing with USA for quite a long time, Sri Lanka, Zimbabwe, Bangladesh. Bangladesh, I have to go back and look. I don't think they started competing at the ICC trophy until like the late 80s, early 90s. And Afghanistan didn't compete at the, quote, ICC Trophy / World Cup qualifier until 2009. And on their first go, they got ODI status competing in the ICC Trophy. If you look at Ireland and Scotland, they were not ICC classified members. They had history in both countries going back 100 years, but Scotland wasn't its own competing country in the ICC kind of tournament sense until the mid 90s, and Ireland similarly. And you look at, one of the things I love looking at is the 2001 ICC Trophy in Canada. USA beat Ireland by 6 wickets in that match, and that was an Ireland team that had the Joyce brothers, Dom and Ed Joyce, and in addition to another couple of players who I believe would go on to be part of the 2007 World Cup squad. USA beat them quite easily. I think they won by 6 wickets with like 5 or 6 overs to spare. And yet, 6 years later, Ireland's in the World Cup and beat Pakistan, and the rest is history. Nepal, same thing. Nepal as a country for a long time didn't exist in terms of the ICC tournament sense, and they, in many ways, sped past USA. There's so many examples of countries that were not competing in ICC events when the ICC Trophy first began in the late 70s, and USA was there, and USA was quite competitive in those ICC Trophy events, but they never actually were able to move forward, and instead they just kind of have been stuck in neutral for many, many years. And it's only been in recent times that they've been competitive enough to get some positive results. But again, the way USA cricket is structured, it's not designed for long-term sustainable success. They've been able to be competitive, in a sense, through the luck of the immigration lottery, is how I describe it. I mean, the strength or weakness of American cricket for the last 30, 40, 50, 60 years has basically been determined by where immigrants decide to migrate. You have a case of, for example, the Danaram brothers, Sunil and Sudesh Danaram. Okay, both Guyanese first-class cricketers. One played for Canada and one played for USA, purely because one was able to get a job in the USA through a work visa, and the other one was able to get a job in a work visa to go to Canada. That's a very arbitrary reason why one would go to one country and one would go to the other. That's not organic development. USA's grassroots strategy has basically been to wait for the grassroots development of India, Pakistan, Jamaica, Guyana, Sri Lanka, Barbados to mature, and then once those grassroots have grown, then they tear those roots out and then try to replant them in New York or Florida or Texas or California. That's not a strategy for long-term sustainability, and but that's what USA has always done. So the fact that USA has now been semi-competitive, if you will, respectable enough to get back to a World Cup qualifier in Zimbabwe when they hadn't been since 2005. They had been in every ICC Trophy / World Cup qualifier from 79 until 2005. And then there was an 18-year gap. They got back to the one in Zimbabwe this past year. They've been to a couple of T20 World Cup qualifiers. But that, I would argue, is purely a function of the fact that they've lucked out with some decent quality players who were raised in India, went through the Indian development system, went through the Pakistan development system, went through the Barbados development system. Those guys decided to come to the U.S. It hasn't been as a consequence of anything that USA administrators have done to cultivate talent organically. And until that changes, until you get players raised in New Jersey, developed in New Jersey, developed in California, developed in Texas, developed in Florida, who are quality players and they're first choice USA players, And those first choice USA players are on the same level as first choice West Indies players or first choice England players, first choice Australian players. Then USA will be able to be competitive. At the moment, what USA administrators are asking is they're asking second choice, third choice, fourth choice Indian players, Pakistan players, South African players to become first choice American players. Well, if you're asking a third choice South African or fourth choice Indian player to beat the first choice Indian players, that's never going to happen. That's just simple logic. You're never going to succeed. And there's a kind of a misconstrued notion that there's it's an ethnic issue, which that's incorrect. There's a subtle difference between ethnic and cultural issues when it comes to this topic. Okay, you talk to people around the U.S. in the cricket scene, and there's a divide in terms of you talk to parents, you talk to other people, you talk to players, coaches, whatever. A lot of the coaches are Indian, ethnically Indian, okay, who are coaching development. They're ethnically Jamaican, whatever, okay. A lot of the players are ethnically Indian. You know, they're second generation, third generation Indian kids, okay, Pakistani kids, Pakistani American, Indian American kids, okay. There is a very subtle but very distinct difference between a kid, an Indian American kid, whose last name is Patel, who's born and raised in New Jersey, versus a Patel who's from Gujarat, India. What you often find is that they don't necessarily get along. There's a, I don't want to know if I want to call it envy or jealousy or just resentment, but the families of players who were born and raised in the U.S., they quite oftentimes feel that players who migrate from another country, they feel that those guys are people who should not be getting opportunities to play for the U.S. They feel that those opportunities should go to the second and third generation American kids, you know, and that's the difference between the culture versus ethnicity dispute that happens in American cricket. You talk to people and they want to see a Sai Mukamala from New Jersey succeed. They want to see a Rahul Jarawala from California succeed. Okay. They want to see a Stephen Taylor from Florida succeed. You know, Stephen Taylor is the son of Jamaican parents, Jamaican immigrants. Sai Mukamala, his parents are Indian. Rahul Jarawala, Indian family. Sanjay Krishnamurthy, his dad is Indian. His mom is American. Okay. You look at other kids. You superficially, what people see externally, people from the outside, and this is something that frustrates me and frustrates a lot of other people. And you see it with the U.S. women's team as well. The U.S. women's team has done they're one of the few shining spots that has really done a great job in terms of commitment to genuine development, where a lot of the women in the U.S. women's team now, the genuine majority are American players, born and raised American players. You've got an Anika Kolan, who is from Northern California, and she's been featured in the ICC marketing campaign for the T20 World Cup that's happening in the USA next year. She's been there's been an video campaign that has been on Instagram and social media that the ICC's run, and Anika Kolan is the star of that campaign. American girl, okay, born and raised in Northern California. You've got you know, players like Chaitanya Reddy Pagadiala, who's from Southern California, born and raised. You've got an Aditi Chidasama, from born and raised in New Jersey, Adisha Dhingra, born and raised in New Jersey. These are all girls who are second generation Indian Americans. Okay. But what happens superficially, I'll never forget, there was a graphic that was put out when the USA women's under 19 team qualified and went to the under 19 World Cup in South Africa in January. And it got put online and they were mocked and ridiculed mercilessly almost entirely by people from India. It was all Indian cricket fans who said, this is just the Indian B team, or this is the India C team, or these aren't real Americans. And the players were quite upset with that. And it was coming from ostensibly people who a lot of external observers would classify as, oh, that's the Indian community, that's their own community. And again, it just highlighted the difference where you've got players. I'm somebody who is very much an auditory observer and learner. Okay, if you talk to these players, you can pick out in an instant by their accent, well, all these girls are American. You could not mistake them for anything but being American by the way they talk. And yet, so often the cricket community bases a lot of their observations on visual observations rather than auditory observations. So superficially, they'll see, oh, all these girls, you've got 13 brown girls. Oh, they're all Indian. The U.S. team, oh, it's the Indian B team. When these are the genuine American cricket players who should be supported. And again, it highlights the kind of subtle issues that go on in the cricket community in the U.S. and how other people outside the U.S. view and treat the American cricket community, where they say, "Oh, well, this is just a bunch of Indian people." In some ways, U.S. administrators are at fault for that, because on the men's side, they really struggle to promote the Simon Kamalas and the Rahul Jarawalas of the world. They would, if you had blind selection battle between player A and player B, and player A's stats are identical to player B's stats, and then they say, well, player A played first-class cricket in India, and player B is somebody who is born and raised in New Jersey, they could both be named Patel. Okay, but U.S. selectors, 99 times out of 100, will pick player A because, oh, he played first-class cricket in India, so he must be better than what we've got locally. And player B never gets an opportunity. And again, that stunts development, discourages players from sticking with the game. They might play with the game up to a certain point, but after a certain point in time, and they realize, I've got no shot being weighed up against the guys who continue to come from India to come participate in the U.S. cricket system. Well, what's the point of me playing? Why am I even bothering? I'll just go study on my MBA. I'll study on my master's. I'll focus on making money, and I won't have to deal with this nonsense. And you know, cricket has already suffered from that and lost players to that. You look at you know, somebody like a Karan Patel. Karan Patel played U.S. under-19 cricket for America. He was also a high-level baseball prospect. Well, he decided he could see the writing on the wall. His dad played for the USA on the cricket team, but he said, you know what? Baseball looks like it's got more to offer me. He was offered a scholarship to go play at UT San Antonio. He was then drafted in the 6th round or 7th round by the Chicago White Sox. And so if you can't even keep players like that in the system, a kid whose dad played cricket for USA and who at one time was playing cricket for USA, but he's saying, you know what? I can see the writing on the wall. There's probably not much in the future for me cricket-wise. I'm going to go see what I can do in baseball. And then he can make money doing it. That's a red flag for cricket administrators.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I agree with that, what you've said there about that, Peter. And also good to hear your insights on the history of associate cricket as well, how it all started, these tournaments, and how the associate nations are involved in cricket, how that concept was developed. So it was good to hear your thoughts on that. Hi, everyone. Hope you enjoyed part 1 of our Associate Cricket Series episode with Peter Della Penna. I hope you enjoyed hearing Peter and I discuss his cricketing journey and the history of associate cricket. Stay tuned for part 2 of our Associate Cricket Series episode with Peter Della Penna.